During every emergency, good-hearted Americans want to send supplies and clothing to our neighbors in need. But more often than not, these well-intended donations become part of the problem instead of the solution. It quickly becomes obvious there is no mechanism for distributing these donations to the affected area. The donations are wasted, and survivors remain in need. Goodwill has always been part of the communities we serve, and when our communities are in need, Goodwill should be visible and there lending a helping hand. In Florida, Goodwill has signed a Memorandum of Understanding with Volunteer Florida. Under Florida's Disaster Management Plan, Volunteer Florida is responsible for one of the 18 emergency support functions: volunteers and donations. This understanding allows Goodwill to participate in training exercises and to be in the Emergency Operations Center if needed during an emergency. One of the things about being in the room is you have first-hand communication with the people on the ground, assessing situations and keeping EOC managers up to speed with exactly what has happened and what types of resources are needed on the ground. Volunteer Florida already advertises that Goodwill is the place to make donations on its website, and in the case of a severe need, the Governor of Florida will ask for the donations during one of his regularly scheduled emergency briefings.
That's what we need to be focused on, helping out our fellow Floridians, our fellow man, and that's what we'll continue to do. Thank you all very much.
Our goal is a proactive plan with Volunteer Florida to provide a seamless, clearly communicated system for disaster victim recovery. It includes a means of increasing material donations, collections, and deployment. The plan includes a pre-produced television commercial, which will be distributed to each participating Goodwill for distribution to the television stations across Florida.
Goodwill donations here help victims there. Donate to your local Goodwill. Your clothing, household items, and furniture donations will be turned into cash to help disaster victims. Goodwill and Volunteer Florida have teamed up to provide the assistance disaster victims need. Goodwill donations here help victims there. Donate to your local Goodwill.
This message informs the public in unaffected areas who wish to make donations intended for disaster survivors to do so through their local Goodwill. These donations to Goodwills across Florida will produce a cash flow and a materials flow that will be directed through the Survivors Aid Fund, or SAF. This fund will be run and managed by appointed members and from participating Florida Goodwills and will be called the Florida Goodwill Association SAF Committee. There are three principal ways the Survivors Aid Fund will distribute aid. The first is a direct cash payment based on an increased flow of donations. The second is the redemption of vouchers authorized by a disaster authority such as the Red Cross, and the third is the opening of a free store in the blighted area. In the case of a direct cash payment, here's how it works. Each of us already knows the normal flow of donations, either weekly or monthly, so it's easy for us to measure the increase in donations following a specific disaster. Now that we know the number of increased donations, we assign an average value of $30 to the donations. If we have 100 additional donations, the increased activity would be valued at $3,000. Our agreement with Volunteer Florida calls for Goodwill to contribute 30% of the increased value to the Survivors Aid Fund. In this case, that would be $3,000 times 30%, or $900. The second method, vouchers for survivors, will be instituted if there is a pressing need and cash payments do not provide the maximum relief. Under this scenario, Florida Goodwill stores operating in an affected area will honor vouchers distributed by a disaster relief agency, such as the Red Cross. The least preferable method is a freestanding store in the affected area. This option is available for those rare instances when there is total destruction and when this is the most efficient way to deliver relief supplies. Of course, free stores require much more work, but with good planning, those needs can be met. The Survivors Aid Fund Committee will develop plans and prepare for rapid deployment of personnel, large tents if vacant buildings are not available, display racks for clothing and goods, materials handling equipment, communication devices, and housing for workers. The cost of establishing these freestanding stores will be reimbursed from the 30% contribution from the increased flow of donations. It is through this partnership with Volunteer Florida and the official sanction of the state of Florida that Goodwill can and will successfully execute this mission. But Florida is only the beginning. FEMA, or the Federal Emergency Management Agency representatives for the Southeast, are intrigued by this unique partnership because it holds promise of solving a long-standing problem of getting needed clothing and supplies to disaster survivors quickly and efficiently through an already established network. Our Florida model can serve as a model for creating similar partnerships with Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, Georgia, South and North Carolina, so that when a storm or disaster hits any one of these states, Goodwill will be on the front line of the recovery.